Our reading this morning is an old story of a father. In the first book of the Hebrew Bible, we read a story from the life of the man seen by many as the father of all, Abraham. Abraham was a traveler. During his life, he moved from one place to another, always encountering people of a culture different from his own. One day, he and Sarai, his wife was not yet called Sarah, were camped under the shade of the oaks of Mamre. That afternoon, he was sitting at the entrance of his tent during the heat of the day. Perhaps it was a day much like yesterday, hot in the afternoon, but almost cool under the shade of the trees. As he sat there, he looked up and saw 3 strangers. Instead of looking at them suspiciously, he ran out of his tent to greet them. He even did more than that. He bowed to the ground, and I imagine he said, "Welcome," for that word is always said when one meets a stranger in that part of the world. He went on to greet them with an honorable title, "My Lord, if I find favor with you, do not pass by your servant." He wanted these strangers to stay. He asked that water be brought for them to wash the dust off their feet. He invited them to sit under the tree and relax, and he even said, "Let me bring a little bread that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you've come to your servant." And so they said, "Do as you have said." It is a bit surprising that they didn't say, "Thank you, we are tired and dusty, we'd love to sit under that tree and wash our feet." But Abraham did not stop there. He rushed to get Sarah and asked her to make cakes with 3 measures of choice flour. And Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the servant, who hastened to prepare it. This must have taken several hours, but finally he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared and set it before them. And he stood by them under the tree while they ate. After this, the 3 men gave him a great and surprising blessing. But today, let us think of Abraham's gift. Let us think of how he welcomed strangers. How do we welcome the strangers that pass by our tent on a hot afternoon? Do we ask them to stay?
The history of this valley abounds with stories of encounters with strangers. One of my ancestors recounts the story of a stranger who spent the night and left a variety of bed bugs in his wake. It was written that if each of those bed bugs could be turned into a coin, he'd become a rich man. Abraham, in the story you just heard, opened his home to strangers. Later, he understood that these strangers were angels. Our religious ancestors were nomadic people, tent dwellers who could not lock themselves away from strangers. I wonder if their vulnerability, have you ever slept in a tent with no one around? That inability to lock doors facilitated a culture of hospitality. It is as if the lack of doors could open hearts as well. Our present culture is more agrarian-based than nomadic, and our penchant for owning land, building houses and farms tragically displaced nomadic people. We put up fences to keep people from simply walking across our property. We put up signs, no trespassing. We meet strangers when we walk out into the world much more often than we invite them into our tents. And traditionally it has been, at least it is in my family, and this is Father's Day, it has been our fathers and grandfathers who stepped out into the world, crossed seas, fought wars, scrambled down gold mines, and encountered people outside their home and the cultures into which they were born. Men from my family were called on missions to far corners of this earth, and they enlisted to fight in wars. Our fathers, grandfathers, often whether they wanted to or not, were called to leave the life they knew and venture into the unknown. They stood on the edges of life, looking down into the possibility of death. And they brought back experiences and memories that changed our lives, the lives of their offspring. My grandfather Willis left Wyoming, where he had spent his whole young life, to be a soldier in France during World War I. He fought in 4 major battles. He fought in the trenches, and we only know of his participation, of being in these battles, because of the stars he received. Yet, when he died, his stories of the war died with him. He never spoke of what he saw and heard, yet it was an enormous part of who he was. He remained in the reserves in the Wyoming Cavalry throughout his life, and he was in active service during World War II as well. And during that time, my uncle and my father both enlisted. And they brought their experiences home. Just when my father was here this week, he talked of being a sailor at age 17 on a supply boat that rode the waves like this. He was seasick the entire time. But I have wondered about this time, this beginning of his introduction into the world. Something about his encounter in the world made him a geologist who believed in evolution, which was revolutionary in the religious group he was brought up in. And he never saw any conflict between his belief in God and in science. He and my grandfather had long, long arguments on Sunday afternoons. But my father, as a field geologist, he would come back home from solo journeys into the desert or jungle with stories. He loved nothing better than to sit with strangers in a strange place and often eat strange food, like sheep's eyeballs. One lesson he stressed to us was to never refuse food. This connected, too, with his depression childhood and led all of us to drinking forbidden coffee at festivals and afternoon tea with Scottish aunties and bowl after bowl of snails that still had grit. Our family culture of eating everything on our plates, no matter what, is perhaps why I am paralyzed at buffet restaurants. My father's experiences in the world blessed his life and the life of his family, but this is often not true. One of my friends traces the violence she experienced in her childhood back to her father's PTSD after serving in the Korean War. Fathers can become those strangers of society that hold signs at crossroads that say, "Homeless, give anything you can." In the Huffington Post, we read that more than 1 million veterans are at risk of becoming homeless, while tens of thousands of former service members are already living without shelter. In fact, 1 in 7 homeless people previously served in the military. This was in a report from December 2011. The fathers who venture out into the world for whatever reason also bring their experience with them of being fathers. The story of one father that changed my life is that of Manuel Jesus Cordova Soberanes. Already I have told you parts of his story. He is one of the thousands of people who usually remain nameless, who attempted to cross the border between Mexico and Arizona each year. In 2007, he undertook the dangerous journey because he was a father who wanted to provide a better life for his children. And when he had almost reached safety, he found a young boy by the side of the road whose mother was dying in a car that was overturned only a few feet away. The boy was shivering in the cold November night. Manuel soon realized that if he did not stay, the boy would die. No one was around. No one would have known that he just left the boy. And in the morning, because he stayed, the boy was taken to safety and Manuel was taken unkindly back across the border to Mexico. And I say unkindly because he was treated very violently. Later, though, when he was asked why he gave up his walk north to stay with the boy, he said, "I had to stay. I have children. I am a father. I could not leave the child." Being a father, being a parent is not easy. The depth of their love for their children sometimes calls men to interrupt their own lives and take a different path, as Manuel did. For the past couple of days, one story of a father has taken hold of my heart. On Friday, Brenda Voizard forwarded me a message from Outreach in Ogden about a father traveling from Oregon across this great country to tell his story of being a father. He is with us today to tell that story. He is a traveler among strangers. And we are in the tent like Abraham. Let us welcome him to our place. Let us welcome Joseph Bell.
Thank you, everybody. I'm a little emotional now, being Father's Day. Give me a moment. My son Jaden Bell, 15 and a half years old, took his life January 19th of this year. He went to the playground with a rope, hung himself. My son was gay. His family accepted him at home and loved him dearly. He was accepted by both his brothers and sister, mother and father, had this supportive outside family members. But being in a small farming community, he wasn't accepted by boys his age at school. My son was very proud of who he was. Jaden come out that he was gay when he was a freshman in high school. We've raised our kids to be okay with who they are and proud of who they are. And I knew at a very young age my son was different. Like I say, I have 3 boys and a daughter. My oldest son is in the Army, mixed martial artist, and he fights on the Army's team. My youngest son is an athlete coming up. And my middle son was soft and kind and sweet. Anybody that knew him loved him. He had a beautiful smile. He was always would compliment you. He'd always tell you, your hair looks nice, or I love that dress, or I love your smile. He would always compliment to make other people feel good. That was his way of loving. He had enough torment at school that he ended up, like I say, taking his life. But prior to that, we went to the school to take care of this. 6 months prior, he talked about suicide and scared the heck out of my wife and I. So we got him into counseling immediately the next day. He was going to a counselor twice a week. And from there, it was once a week, and then once every couple of weeks. And he was at once a month. And he was a cheerleader. He come to me his sophomore year and told me, "Dad, I want to be a cheerleader." I about fell out of my chair. It's like, "Are you sure, son?" "Yep, that's what I want to do." "Okay." So we supported him in that. I was very proud of him. I'd go to as many games as I could. I didn't see the heckling while I was there, but I think the students knew when Dad was there because I'd always sit in front of him. But when I wasn't there, it was really hard for him. In PE, it was really tough for him. And the school shied away from taking care of the problem. And there's more to the story. I only have so much time. How much time do I have? Okay. Yeah. So my son, he was always quiet. He wouldn't talk a whole lot about the trouble he was having. When he would get home, I think he didn't show it much because I think that was his safe place. He felt good. You know, he'd come home and smile for the most part. So we didn't really understand that until 6 months prior. Like I say, he was talking about it then, and so we knew things were getting tough. He started getting into more trouble. He got an MIP, which is minor in possession of alcohol. These are things totally out of his characteristic. But we know now that he was self-medicating himself, trying to fit in and, you know, do what kids do when they're young and having trouble. Anyways, my wife called the school. Jaden, like I say, Jaden was having trouble. My wife called the school, and we set up an appointment. It took a whole week to get in to the counselor. Once we got in there, my son had 3 kids that were really, really bad to him. And so he went there to give the names, and he tried to give the names 4 or 5 different times in the meeting, our meeting. But every time he would go to give the name, the counselor would cut him off and say, "Jaden, are you sure you want to give the names? This is only going to cause you more trouble." And these are things that my son had told me 6 months prior. I wanted to go to the school. But Jaden was saying, "No, no, no, Dad, no, no, it's going to cause me more trouble." Well, I wish I wouldn't have listened, but I was trying to respect my son, take care of my son. But I failed. Anyways, like I said, this went on 4 or 5 times. Jaden, you can go to a different school, the counselor said. You can go to Cove, Union, Ambler. Try to push him off to a different school. Like it's going to be different at any other small school for a gay child. Finally, the last 5 minutes of it, I said, my son is ready to give the names. So my son gave the names of the 3 boys. There was a lot more, but 3 of them were real bad. Well, a week prior to that, my son got caught smoking at school. He had an in-school suspension immediately. As soon as he was caught, he was taken to the principal's office. Well, then here we have 3 boys my son gave the names of. And this is Friday after school. The next day, or excuse me, the next Monday, my son comes home from school and I ask him, how'd things go today? Oh, all right. Well, what happened? I don't know. They didn't tell me anything. All right. Tuesday, the same thing. Wednesday, the same thing. Thursday, the same thing. He didn't know anything. The phone rings at 3:30 in the afternoon. I answer the phone. And they ask for my son, Jaden. So I hand the phone to my son, and I hear Jaden go, yes, 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 okay, yes. He hangs up the phone, and in tears he says, see, Dad, I told you they weren't going to do anything. They were asking him again, Jaden, are you sure you still want to go through with this? This is only going to cause you more trouble. So our school's not addressing the problems. It starts in the family household, raising our children. That's where it starts, to raise our kids with respect and teach them how to respect others of all races, religions, of everything. We're all different. Everybody's different. Sexual preferences. Doesn't matter. My son, I know, didn't choose to be gay. He did not choose this. Like I said, I raised him. I know, I hear this especially a lot on my walk, where your son chose this. I promise you, my son did not choose to be gay. So, anyways, it was that Saturday, that was on a Thursday afternoon, that Saturday, he took his life. And like I say, he didn't die right away. We life flighted him to, I'm trying to blank here, to Portland, yeah, to, what is it? I'm drawing a blank. I'm sorry. Anyways, we Dornbecker's Hospital, Children's Hospital. And we were there for 15 days. And the 15th day, he passed. Of course, that's the toughest thing parents can go through, is to lose their children. It's not right that children go first. This all could have been prevented. So I want to tell you, everybody out here, I appreciate you all for being here, because you guys understand, you know, that Jesus loves everybody. I think we're raising our children in organized religion to be homophobic. I truly believe that. When I had after my son had passed and we're getting ready for my walk, we threw a pancake breakfast. Well, we were going to hold it at a church. 3 different churches said no because Jaden was gay. This is after he had passed. These are churches. How disgusting is that? To me, that's just, it breaks my heart. This is how then they wonder why my son's dead. Because we raised homophobic children. Anyways, my walk, I was lying in bed just wanting to die after my son had passed. I was laying in bed literally for a week. And knowing that I can't die, that I still have my family to live for, it just come to me to walk. I didn't know how far to walk. I thought I'd walk across the state. No, that's not far enough. I thought I'd walk across Oregon and Idaho. No, that's not far enough. I knew I had to walk across the country. I'm going to talk to anybody and everybody that will listen. We can't lose any more of our children. Cannot. I would hate for any other family to go through what our family's going through. So I pledge everything I have, my heart, my soul, to make this walk and make as much change in our communities as possible. My walk consists of, it's from Oregon, Idaho, Utah. From here I'm going into Denver, Colorado. Denver to Kansas, I'm going to drop down into Oklahoma to Texas, then Louisiana, and all across the south there. Hit Florida and back up the East Coast. And I'm going to end my walk in New York City. To finish this up, my son in 8th grade went to Washington, D.C. and New York City with his 8th grade class. That was the highlight of my son's life. He absolutely loved it. He took over 1,000 pictures while he was there. And he said, "Dad, when I graduate, I want to go to college there and live there." So that's why I make it my destination. Ultimately, what I would like to do is raise enough money on my walk to be able to have a life-size bronze statue of my son put in New York City, like at a P flag, or, you know, somewhere like that, standing there. If you go to Faces for Change on Facebook or Faces for Change on the internet, you'll meet my son and our nonprofit organization that we had started. I'm so proud of my son, and I would love to share him with you. So if you'd like, please find the website and meet him. Thank you.
When I spoke with Joe just last night about coming and talking with us, he expressed concern that he would simply be preaching to the choir. He wanted to talk with people whose hearts might be changed by his story. And when I couldn't find him a more conservative place for his message today, it was pretty late to get somewhere. I reassured him that although it was true that we are already convinced that his story, we are already convinced of what he is saying, that his story would inspire us to action. Let us pledge ourselves that energy of action bit of when we light the chalice, of finding ways we can make a real difference in the schools of this valley. Let us take a father's plea into our hearts and work towards making a world in which LGBT youth will not consider taking their lives. I invite you afterwards to come up and talk with him. He will be with us through the coffee hour. And please ask him questions, because he will give you ideas of how you can make a difference. May it be so. Amen.